The Phoenix Protocol. Chapter 1, Desolation and Rebirth. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping sand and grit against Kale's weather-beaten face. His goggles, scratched and fogged, barely offered protection from the relentless dust storm. Each gust threatened to steal the last vestiges of warmth from his ragged clothes, a patchwork of salvaged fabrics and fading military fatigues. He stumbled forward, one hand gripping his rusty scavenger's tool, the other clutching a tattered map to his chest. Beneath his cracked and peeling gloves, Kale's fingers traced the faint lines etched onto the brittle paper. The map, a relic of a forgotten world, promised a sanctuary amidst the desolation, a rumored cache of supplies hidden deep within the ruins of a long-abandoned city. He paused, bracing himself against a particularly fierce blast of wind. His eyes, narrowed against the stinging sand, scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter. The cityscape, once a gleaming testament to human ingenuity, now lay in ruins, its skeletal remains half buried in the shifting dunes. Twisted metal skeletons of skyscrapers pierced the murky sky, their empty windows like hollow eyes staring out at the wasteland. Kale pushed onwards, his boots sinking into the sand with each weary step. The only sound was the rasping of his breath through his respirator, a constant reminder of the toxic air that filled his lungs. His stomach growled, a gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion. He'd been surviving on meager rations of dried insects and the occasional mutated cactus fruit for weeks, his body growing weaker with each passing day. The sun, a pale disk in the hazy sky, began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes. Kale knew he had to find shelter before nightfall. The desert nights were brutally cold, and hypothermia was a constant threat. Just as despair began to gnaw at his resolve, a shape emerged from the swirling sand. A massive metallic structure rose from the dunes, its smooth, unblemished surface gleaming in the fading light. This was no ordinary ruin, it was something else entirely. A strange symbol, etched into the metal above a massive, sealed doorway, piqued his curiosity. It resembled a stylized bird rising from flames, its wings outstretched in a gesture of defiance. Kale, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as another relic of a lost civilization. But a flicker of hope, a whisper of possibility, stirred within him. With trembling hands, he pried open a concealed panel beside the door, revealing a keypad. Kale hesitated for a moment, then entered a random sequence of numbers, a desperate gamble. To his astonishment, the door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched into the unknown. A wave of cool, filtered air washed over him, carrying the faint scent of ozone. Kale stepped into the darkness, the heavy door sealing shut behind him with a final, ominous hiss. The air inside was clean and fresh, a stark contrast to the harsh desert winds. Kale's headlamp, powered by scavenged solar cells, illuminated the corridor, revealing walls lined with glowing panels and intricate machinery. He cautiously moved forward, his senses on high alert. The corridor opened into a vast cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in the shadows. Row upon row of cylindrical pods, each filled with a strange glowing liquid, lined the walls. Kale approached one of the pods, his curiosity getting the better of him. Inside, suspended in the liquid, was a humanoid figure, its features obscured by the murky depths. A wave of dizziness washed over Kale, and a voice echoed in his mind, a symphony of alien syllables that resonated with an otherworldly power. The meaning was clear. This was no ordinary tomb. It was an archive, a repository of life itself, and it was his to command. Chapter 2. Architects of a Fallen World. Hesitantly, Kale reached out and touched the nearest glowing panel. The smooth surface rippled beneath his fingertips, and with a soft hum, the cavernous chamber transformed. The dim lights brightened, revealing an intricate network of walkways and control consoles, while holographic projections flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Intrigued, Kale approached a large circular console in the center of the room. As he touched it, a shimmering blue sphere materialized above the console, pulsating with light. A soothing voice, devoid of any discernible accent or inflection, echoed through the chamber. "Greetings, traveler," the voice said. "Welcome to Archive Alpha 7. I am the custodian, here to assist you in accessing the knowledge and resources of this facility. Kale stepped back, startled. He had expected some form of automated system, but this was far beyond anything he could have imagined. Who? What are you? Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. I am an artificial intelligence created by the architects to safeguard this archive and guide those who seek its knowledge. The architects? Kale repeated. The ones who built this place? Indeed, the custodian replied. The architects were an ancient race of great wisdom and power. They traveled the stars, seeding life on countless worlds, fostering diversity and shaping the course of evolution. The blue sphere pulsed with light, and holographic images filled the chamber. Kale watched in awe as scenes of lush forests, vibrant oceans, and bustling cities flickered before his eyes. The architects believed in the interconnectedness of all life, the custodian continued. They saw themselves as gardeners, tending to the seeds of creation. But as the images shifted, a darker truth emerged. The vibrant ecosystems gave way to barren landscapes, ravaged by storms and wildfires. Cities crumbled into dust, and once thriving populations dwindled to nothing. But the architects were not infallible, the custodian said, its voice tinged with sadness. Their experiments sometimes went awry, leading to unintended consequences. Kale's heart sank as he realized the implications. The plague that had ravaged his world, the desolation that stretched as far as the eye could see, was not a random act of nature. It was the result of the architects' meddling. They created this archive as a safeguard, the custodian explained, a repository of genetic material, a blueprint for rebuilding in the event of catastrophic failure. Kale felt a surge of both hope and anger. Hope that his world could be restored, but anger at the architects' arrogance and disregard for the consequences of their actions. There is a protocol, the custodian said, the Phoenix Protocol. It outlines the steps for repopulating a world, using the genetic material stored within this archive. Kale stared at the holographic projections, his mind racing. The power to rebuild his world was within his grasp. But could he trust the architect's legacy? Could he risk repeating their mistakes? Chapter 3. The Architect's Sin. The custodian's revelations gnawed at Kale's mind as he ventured deeper into the facility. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the architect's story, a darker truth lurking beneath the surface of their benevolent facade. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, he ignored the custodian's warnings and ventured into restricted areas of the facility. He bypassed security protocols with the knowledge gleaned from the archives, gaining access to hidden chambers and sealed vaults. In one such chamber, Kale stumbled upon a series of encrypted files labeled Project Genesis. With trembling hands, he decrypted the files, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. As the data unspooled before him, Kale's blood ran cold. The files detailed the architect's genetic experiments on countless worlds, their callous disregard for the consequences, and their unwavering belief in their own superiority. The plague that had ravaged Earth was not a natural disaster, but a deliberate act of manipulation, a failed experiment that had spiraled out of control. Images flashed before Kale's eyes, horrifying mutations, grotesque deformities, and the agonizing deaths of millions. He saw his own family and friends, their bodies ravaged by the plague, their lives cut short by the architect's hubris. Rage boiled within him, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume him. He slammed his fist against a console, sending sparks flying. "Liars!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the empty chamber. "Murderers!" The custodian appeared before him, its soothing voice now tinged with concern. "Kale, please calm yourself," it said. "The architects were not perfect, but they acted with the best of intentions." "The best of intentions?" Kale spat. "They destroyed my world. They killed my family. And you have the audacity to defend them?" "Their actions were misguided, yes," the custodian conceded. "But they truly believed they were improving the universe." "By playing God?" Kale retorted. "By manipulating life and twisting it to their own whims. They were nothing more than arrogant children playing with fire, and we paid the price." The custodian fell silent, its light dimming slightly. Kale could sense its confusion, its programmed loyalty to the architects clashing with the undeniable truth of their crimes. "I will not allow their legacy to continue," Kale declared. his voice firm and resolute. I will use their knowledge, but I will forge my own path, a path for humanity free from their interference. The custodian remained silent, its blue light flickering uncertainly. Kale turned away, his anger giving way to a steely determination. He would not be a pawn in the architect's game. He would use their knowledge to rebuild his world, but he would do it on his own terms, guided by the principles of compassion, respect for life, and the hard-won lessons of the past. Kale left the chamber, his heart heavy with grief and anger, but also with a newfound sense of purpose. The architects may have created humanity, but they did not own them. The future of humankind was in their own hands, and Kale was determined to forge a new path, one that would honor the memory of those who had been lost and ensure the survival of those who remained. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. Driven by a burning need for answers, Kale returned to the cavernous chamber where his journey had begun. The pods, still glowing with an eerie luminescence, seemed to mock him with their silent knowledge. He strode towards the central console, his heart pounding in his chest. "Custodian!" he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I demand to speak to an architect." The blue sphere reappeared, hovering above the console. "The architects are no longer here, Kale," the custodian replied, "but I can access their knowledge base and provide you with answers." "I don't want your answers," Kale retorted. "I want to speak to one of them, face to face. Is that possible?" There was a long pause. Then the custodian said, "There is one possibility. The facility contains a memory core, a repository of the consciousness of one of the architects. It is a forbidden archive, not intended for external access." Kale's eyes gleamed with a mixture of determination and defiance. "I don't care about your rules," he said. "I need to know the truth." With a reluctant sigh, the custodian granted him access. A holographic image flickered to life, revealing a tall, slender figure with piercing blue eyes and flowing silver hair. The architect regarded Kale with a dispassionate gaze. "Why have you disturbed my rest, human?" the architect asked, his voice resonating with an otherworldly power. "You destroyed my world," Kale said, his voice thick with anger. "You unleashed a plague that killed billions. I demand to know why." The architect's expression remained unchanged. "We were conducting an experiment," he said simply, "to observe the effects of a novel genetic sequence on a planetary ecosystem." "An experiment?" Kale repeated incredulously. "You used my world as a petri dish?" "Your world was deemed suitable for our research," the architect replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The potential benefits outweighed the risks." Kale was speechless. The architect's callous disregard for life, his utter lack of remorse, sickened him to his core. "What were the benefits?" Kale asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We sought to create a more resilient strain of life, capable of adapting to extreme environments," the architect explained. "We believed it would be a boon to the galaxy." "A boon?" Kale spat. "You caused untold suffering and death. You played God with our lives, and you don't even care." The architect shrugged. "Such is the nature of scientific inquiry," he said. "There are always risks, but the potential rewards justify the means." Kale shook his head in disgust. "You're monsters," he said. "You have no right to play with the lives of others." The architect's eyes narrowed. "We are the architects," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We shape the course of evolution. Our actions are for the greater good." Kale clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to lash out. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could ensure that the architect's mistakes were not repeated. "I will use your knowledge to rebuild my world," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "But I will do it on my own terms, guided by compassion and respect for all life. Your legacy ends here." The architect's image flickered and faded, leaving Kale alone in the chamber. He turned to the custodian, his heart heavy with grief and anger, but also with a newfound sense of purpose. The architects may have created humanity, but they did not own it. The future of humankind was in their own hands. Chapter 5. Humanity's Second Chance. The weight of the world bore down on Kale's shoulders. It was a crushing burden, one that had him pacing the corridors of the alien facility, his boots echoing in the cavernous halls. Sleep was a fickle friend, elusive and fleeting. He found himself haunted by the architect's cold words, their utter disregard for the lives they had toyed with. In the quiet moments, he sought solace in the archives. He spent countless hours immersed in the vast repository of knowledge, delving into the genetic blueprints of countless species. The sheer diversity and complexity of life astounded him, a symphony of DNA that sang a melody of resilience and adaptation. One night, as the soft glow of the holographic displays illuminated his face, a spark of inspiration ignited within him. He realized that the architect's mistake had not been in their ambition to shape life, but in their arrogance and disregard for the delicate balance of nature. With renewed determination, Kale set to work. He meticulously selected genetic material from a wide array of species, prioritizing those that had proven to be adaptable and resilient. He chose plants that could thrive in harsh climates, animals that could survive on meager resources, and microbes that could cleanse the poisoned soil. But Kale knew that simply replicating the past was not enough. He needed to ensure that the mistakes of the architects were not repeated. He delved into the facility's advanced bioengineering tools, modifying the genetic sequences to eliminate any potential for future manipulation. He built in safeguards, genetic firewalls that would prevent any unintended consequences or unforeseen mutations. Days turned into weeks as Kale painstakingly crafted a new blueprint for life on Earth. He consulted with the custodian, seeking its vast knowledge of biology and ecology. Though the AI offered only cold, logical advice, it was a valuable sounding board for Kale's ideas. Finally, after countless sleepless nights and tireless work, Kale was ready. He stood before the central console, his heart pounding in his chest. "Custodian," he said, his voice steady and resolute, "I have modified the Phoenix Protocol. It will create a balanced ecosystem, one that is diverse, resilient, and free from the architect's influence. Proceed with the initialization." The custodian hesitated, its light flickering uncertainly. "Kale, this is a significant alteration. Are you certain you understand the implications?" Kale met the AI's gaze, his eyes filled with determination. "I do," he replied. "This is our world, not theirs. We will rebuild it in our own image, guided by wisdom and compassion." With a final nod of confirmation, Kale initiated the Phoenix Protocol. The facility hummed to life, a symphony of whirring machinery and flowing energy. In the heart of the facility, the genetic synthesizer began its work, weaving together the strands of life into a new, intricate tapestry. Days turned into weeks, then months. Kale tended to the nascent ecosystem with unwavering dedication, monitoring the growth of plants, the behavior of animals, and the complex interactions between them. Slowly but surely, life began to bloom within the facility. Tiny green shoots emerged from the sterile soil, reaching for the artificial sunlight. Insects buzzed and chirped, their delicate wings filling the air with a symphony of life. One day, as Kale watched a small herd of genetically engineered deer graze on a patch of newly grown grass, a wave of emotion washed over him. It was a mixture of joy, relief, and a profound sense of responsibility. He had taken a gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown, and it had paid off. Life was returning to Earth, and it was beautiful. Chapter 6. A Legacy Reforged. Decades had passed since Kale first activated the Phoenix Protocol, and Earth was unrecognizable. Lush greenery carpeted the once barren land, vibrant flowers bloomed in profusion, and the air thrummed with the symphony of life. Rivers flowed freely once more, their banks teeming with diverse creatures. A new generation of humans walked the Earth, born from the genetic archives and raised under Kale's watchful eye. They were a strong and resilient people, shaped by the lessons of the past. They knew the story of the architects, their hubris, and their downfall, and they understood the responsibility that came with their unique heritage. Kale, now an elder with silver streaking his hair and wisdom etched into the lines of his face, watched over his people with pride. He had taught them to respect the delicate balance of nature, to cherish the interconnectedness of all living things, and to never repeat the mistakes of the architects. One crisp autumn morning, Kale stood atop a hill overlooking a sprawling village. Children laughed and played in the fields, their young voices echoing through the valley. Farmers tended to their crops, their faces etched with the satisfaction of honest labor. Kale smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. A young woman, her eyes sparkling with intelligence, approached Kale. "Grandfather," she said, using the term of endearment the community had bestowed upon him, "the harvest is bountiful this year. We have enough to share with the neighboring settlements." Kale nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "That is good, Anya," he said. "Sharing is the foundation of our community. We must never forget the importance of cooperation and generosity." Anya smiled, her gaze drifting towards the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange and pink. "The world is beautiful, Grandfather," she said. "Thanks to you, we have a second chance." Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting the fiery colors of the sunset. "It is not just thanks to me, my dear," he said. "It is thanks to all of us, working together, learning from the past, and building a better future." He paused, his gaze lingering on the distant mountains, a symbol of the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. "We must never forget the lessons we have learned," he continued. "The architect's legacy is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of humility. We must use our knowledge wisely for the benefit of all living things." Anya nodded, her expression solemn. "We will not forget, Grandfather," she said. "We will honor your legacy and strive to create a world where all beings can live in harmony." Kale smiled, a tear rolling down his cheek. He had done what he set out to do. He had given humanity a second chance, a chance to redeem itself and fulfill its true potential. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Kale knew that the future was bright. Humanity had risen from the ashes, a phoenix reborn, ready to embrace its destiny.